But Grandpa Floyd used to look at small children straight in the eye, an otherwise kind man. And he used to look at small children and say, "You've got ancestors." And we denied it.
Always forget. That's how I remember. The other one is we are so glad to have all of you folks here today, and we've got a wonderful program today, starting with Jim Connor, and then this afternoon we're going to be paying tribute to the Johnson family. We've got a few people I want to thank, especially. A lot of people worked hard to make this happen. Running down the list, the city of Albertville, Jim Connor, Joyce Cauthen, Flying Jenny, that's a band, D.R. Storm, who did a wonderful video and made one of our flyers, Robbie Raines for her contribution, she's one of the Johnson family, Carla Johnson gathered up all these instruments and all the information about them. Boy Scout Troop 71 helped us refurbish our display cases. Johnson Lumber donated some materials. Stevens Glass, Rook and Raven, and Dina Wilson for those wonderful cookies. We hope you'll help yourself to those and get thirsty and then buy a bottle of water for $1. Speaking of money items, there are some things for sale from Joyce Cauthen. I think she's already sold out of her book, which is with Fiddle and Rosined bow. It's the history of old-time music in Alabama. It is available on Amazon.com. And also Jim Connor's got some books and CDs, or whatever they call them. Are they still CDs? Yeah. Okay. And DVDs and that kind of thing. And all of those who did bring their instruments to allow them to be displayed, that's a great honor for you to bring them for this reunion. And all of the volunteers who cleaned the place up, spiffed it up, and helped put it on. So if y'all will, help me give thanks to all these people. It's getting pretty close to time, isn't it? Yeah. Got 2 minutes. Anybody know a good joke? Carla.
Those of you that brought the fiddles this morning, I have checked them all in, and when you pick up your fiddles, would you please check it out with me so I can check the instruments off as you get them, so that you'll be sure to get the right instrument back.
They look a lot alike. Okay, well, I guess we're on a countdown for about 1 minute now. Hey, Ben,
Hey, Lawrence.
glad you're here.
Thank you.
All right. And I guess we could go ahead and start the introductions and start something early. I'm going to turn it over to George Jones, who knows more about this than I do. He's from WNBA.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here this morning, and it's our privilege at WAVU to have been the ones promoting this event, and so I know that you're going to enjoy what's coming up. In just a moment, I'll introduce Mr. Beecher Hyde. He's known as the Ancient One. I'm known as the Aged One, if you listen to WAVU. And but before I introduce him, I can't help but tell you a story very quickly. When I was a young soldier, stopped in Tokyo, Japan, on my way to Incheon, Korea. And when they got there, I found out that one of the interesting items in Japan was known as a banjo. And if you know anything about Japan, a banjo is a toilet. And so forever since then, I have always been amused by the thought of what does the Japanese think when they run into somebody like Jim Connor and ask you, what do you do? I play the banjo. So I couldn't help but tell you that. But in any case, right now I want to introduce probably somebody that needs no introduction, and that is Mr. Beecher Hyde. He is a longtime friend of Jim Connor. He knows a whole lot more about him than I do. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Beecher Hyde.
Oh, it really puts you in a spot to follow an aged one like George Jones. He's been there and done that. People ask me everywhere I go, how old is George Jones? Well, I said, I don't really know. Nobody else really knows. But I do know one thing for sure. In the book of Genesis, it says, when God said, let there be light, there was light, and the first thing he saw was George Jones.
That was only after they had to tell Beecher to move out of the way.
I'll tell you something, this is a memorable occasion for everybody, especially me, and like yourself, because the man I'm going to introduce to you is no stranger to this area. The thing about this guy that I'm going to bring up is that he never forgot his people. Never forgot his people. I met him about 50 years ago in Walnut Grove, Alabama, down in Edinburgh County, the Fiddle Convention. When he was Richard Lockmiller and Jim Connor. And they won the all events program down there, the best entertainment event, of course. And they went on from there to various places all over the world and made a great name for himself. But he's always a great guy and a gentleman. Before I bring him up, we have a descendant of the Johnson family down here, the District Judge-elect Mitch Floyd. He stand up, Judge. Judge-elect Mitch Floyd. You're going to see today some things that you haven't seen in years. Some of you haven't seen at all. And it went back a lot of memories to you. But most of all, the man of the hour was Mr. Jim Connor. Let's have a big welcome, Mr. Jim Connor. You are truly a gentleman, buddy. Never forgot anybody.
Well, my wife told me if I didn't come today, she's going to divorce me, so I guess
Well, thank you. You're welcome, Jim. Can I tell this right quick on you?
Yeah.
After that, I met him in Walnut Grove. They went overseas to a place in Europe or somewhere, and Richard Lockmiller chewed tobacco, but he couldn't find no beet stuff tobacco over there, so he and Jim wrote me a letter and said, how about sending me some chewing tobacco over here? They don't know what I'm talking about. So I've got some packages together, mailed it to them, and we've been friends ever since. Oh, thank you.
Oh, by the way, that was Richard that chewed. It wasn't me. He still chews. Yeah, I prayed for Richard last summer. He had a horrible car wreck. A drunk person hit him head on and his wife, and it pushed the motor back into his side of the. He was driving and crushed his accelerator leg. And the orthopedic surgeon said he called it accelerator damage, where you
you're pushing the brake to try to stop, keep the person from hitting you, so you stiffen your right leg, and when the motor comes up in on you, you stiffen that leg, boy, and it is. So, because we were supposed to have reunions this fall back here, but maybe we'll make it in the spring. He's had a long recovery. Now the Lord didn't need him to have very much money, but he died standing pat with his old 5-string sitting under the bed on his family's original homestead plat. And when he brushed his fingers across that old 5-string, the music poured out like a fountain. And they called him Uncle Arthur, and he never left Sand Mountain. I met him at the Walnut Grove Business Convention, and there I asked him to teach me to play. And he looked straight down into my eyes. These were the words I heard him say. Now there ain't no music in my strings, I just use them to make my beat. Ain't no dancing in my shoes, I use them to cover my feet. Banjo's a piece of skin, some wood, some metal, albeit plated with gold. Dancing comes from the heart, and music from the soul. Well, I sat right down on the front row of that fiddler's convention. Pretty soon, he came out on the stage, and I could see his face covered with 3/4 of a century of age. And he danced his buck dance entry as the band began to play, and I sat back in amazement as his body began to sway. Oh, he cut it to the right, he cut her to the left, and he'd bring it on down the middle. And I could see the sweetest smile on the face of old Monk Daniel, who was sawing away on the fiddle. Later on, it came time for him to enter the old 5-string. And when he touched that banjo, the whole hall began to sing. Now, he didn't play it all that fancy, and he didn't play it all that loud. But when he touched it, a hush came over that Walnut Grove crowd. Later on, I met him once again in the parking lot out back. And I asked him once again, would he teach me to play? He turned around, looked at me, and this is what I heard him say. He said, son, you know, there's no bootlegger live up a mountain for me. He said, of a Sunday afternoon, I get my pickup and I drive up their way, and just across this side of their property line, there's a big old maple tree, and I park my truck, sit on the running board, I pull out my banjo, and I play. Pretty soon, a whole passel of kids come running down that trail before long. When they gather around me, I sing them this song. Now there ain't no music in these strings, just use them to make you beat. Ain't no dancing in my boots, just use them to cover my feet. A banjo's a piece of skin, some wood, some metal, albeit plated with gold. Dancing comes from the heart, and music from the soul. Well, I learned everything I could from Arthur Kirkendall, and I traveled this whole world round in clubs and concert halls. But the greatest thing he left for me is a mandate to which I'm bound, is to use everything he taught me to set these good stories down. 'Cause there ain't no music in my strings, just use them to make a beat. Ain't no dancing in my shoes, just use them to warm my feet. Banjo's a piece of skin, some wood, some metal, albeit plated with gold. Dancing comes from your heart, music from your soul. cheat sheet here, and it says, I'm a cheapskate. Went to the eye doctor, and she's a very nice lady. She said, you know, you don't really need these $400 glasses. Just go to the dollar store and get glasses. But I have to wear 2 of them when I read. All right, I'm just going to read this because I hope to accomplish this. If I don't, at least you'll know what I hope to do. My presentation involves the history of Sand Mountain music with special emphasis on the family of Arthur and Esther Kirkendall and other families, the Cochrans and the Joneses and the various extended families who were all involved with Arthur and Esther's music. I will attempt to chart my rise from a scratch teenage banjo player to what Earl Scruggs described as the finest old-time 5-string banjo player I ever heard. I was born in Gadsden, Etowah County on June the 12th, 1938, and have lived on Sand Mountain since the last Friday in March of the year 1961. That was the moment I met Uncle Arthur at the Walnut Grove Fiddlers Convention, and that's a misprint. It's Saturday, last Saturday in March, the year 1961, and that's the night I met Beecher. I say Uncle as my banjo teacher because after knowing him for several years, his wife, Miss Esther, we call him, told me that Arthur had adopted me as his son. And I said, well, he's my uncle. And she said, well, you're his son. Arthur passed away in 1978 at 90 years of age. Included will be stories of late night rides over back roads between Sand Mountain towns on the way to and from old time square dances and community centered concerts, gathering at musicians' homes for musical and sumptuous covered dish feast. And we'll go from country churches, from a gold and platinum record sessions and spiffy Ivy League concerts to the stages of both the Grand Ole Opry House, the old one and the new one. We cover over 40 countries across the world as well. By now, ever since actually it's about 56 countries. But the constant center and focus of our presentation is the influence and the spread of the music from Arthur Kirkendall and others that has originated with and been created in the homes of the people of Sand Mountain. That's my job, so pray for me. Now, I got this banjo, and if you might notice, you look at Arthur's over there, and this is the closest I could find to it. And they're pretty much brothers and sisters, and I got this at a 2nd Avenue pawn shop in Birmingham, Alabama for $75 in the late 60s, and I thought, aha, I've got a copy. And I almost had a copy, had to have the neck worked on it. And so the first night that I heard him play, he played Boil a Cabbage Down. Y'all know that? And he played it very straightforward. But everybody listened, as I said in my song. Played it like that till I learned that. And I said, well, I'm going. So then he would say, okay, can you learn that? And I said, yeah. And so we practiced about it. I had it pretty well. And he said, okay, good. Now we're going to play it again. And so he played. And I said, well, where do those other notes come from? Well, you just got to rock. I said, okay, slow that down and do that. Well, he slowed it down and he went, he's just playing the melody thing. So it really frustrated me a little bit because it'd slow it down and he'd just go, slow it down? Okay, Jim, it's like this. I said, but stuff. And he said, oh, well, I got to be playing up tempo before I can do that. He just said, have it. And so I tried to listen. Well, I figured, okay. And he said, I really didn't say much, except I said, well, now you're picking off with the left hand so much. It's, oh, yeah. You pick a lot with the left hand, sometimes almost as much with the right. So the left hand is easy to play. It makes plenty of sound. And the right hand is. So, unlike the guitar, when you play with the left hand on the banjo, it's just as loud as the right hand. Now, guitar players will pick with the left hand. They call it pizzicato, you know, those flamenco players and stuff. But boy, they really have to hit that guitar hard to get the good volume. But a banjo, the volume with the left hand is easy to do. And so I started to go, okay, I got to watch that left hand. And that's pretty much the secret. So I did. And I learned. This was his basic style. This is basic right hand, but you add the picking on the first and third string with the left hand alternate, and you get that extra note. This is a basic frail, and this is old-time rapping frail with the left hand. That's a basic lick right here. So all I kept and all this fancy up as if I was in a contest. His right hand. And when he would slow it down, like I said, he wouldn't play all those extra notes. So I said, there's something else in there. This was weeks and weeks go by playing about every other Saturday from after that first Fiddler's Convention, 61, I'd come up there. And about the third month, I would come. I was attending Livingston College, it's now West Alabama, down in Livingston, Alabama, the rest of the spring, and then through the summer, I would come up there, and then I enrolled at Birmingham Southern, and I continued the whole next year to come at least every other Saturday. When I would come home, I wouldn't come home to Gadsden, my folks, I'd just go straight to the Kirkendall. And after about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times, I had the folks' car, a little Dodge Dart. Daddy loved Dodge Darts, and a little Dodge Dart, and came up on Saturday evening about 7, 8 o'clock, and we played for 2 hours, and I said, well, I got to go home. So Arthur said, well, why don't you spend the night? Why don't you spend the night? That's the way they were, right? There's the daughter right there. And so I said, well, the mother's playing for the Sunday school on the piano at First Baptist Church Gadsden, and there's a breakfast before, so I gotta go home because they gotta get up and go down to church about 7:30. And so Miss Esther said, "Oh, you're a church boy?" And I said, "Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm a member of my class at First Baptist Church. I was raised in church." She said, "Oh, you're baptized?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. I was baptized when I was 12 years old." She said, "Oh." And suddenly, she got a lot warmer. And said, "Well, why don't you spend the night? We'll get up real early and get your breakfast, and you can get home by 7 o'clock. And I said, "Well, okay." So they cleaned all this stuff off the bed in the front room, and it was full of stuff. You know, all the stuff over there, all kind of, they use that as a catch-all room. So they cleared the bed, and I spent the night. And after that, when I came up, she said, we've cleaned up your room. I said, oh, and she said, it's Jimmy's room now. They call me Jimmy most of the time. And I said, okay. And so I would always spend the night. After about 3 months of that, my folks, Mother and Daddy, they were at the steel plant. And Mother was chairman of the PTA of 11th Street School always. And she was, so they were, well, why don't you just come by here, say hello to us, and then you're gone to Sand Mountain, and we don't see you for the whole weekend. And so they came up and met Mr. and Miss Kirkendall and decided they were okay, and they were great people. They knew where I was, you know. And I guess Mother and Dad are a little bit jealous that when I came home from college on the weekends, I didn't stay with them very much. Anyway, so they understood, and then they became friends. But years later, Esther told me, well, we didn't know about you at first. Now, she said, Arthur, anybody play music or into music, he'd be friends with. But I imagine over the years, in their marriage, sometimes Arthur would go play somewhere at a Fiddle or a square dance, VFW off in Scottsboro or, I don't know, Guntersville somewhere, and some of the people in the band might have maybe been a little drinking and carrying on. Some of them did, Arthur didn't, but maybe she wasn't sure about me, what kind of a companion I was going to be until she found out I was a church boy. I started to say good church person, I mean, you know, I'm still sinning and asking for forgiveness every day, just like most of you. But that was her, so we became so close, and it was wonderful. So I'm going along, pull the cameras in. And I said, okay, there's another note there, and I couldn't see it, and he said, let's see it. All right, here, I'll try to do it for you. You maybe didn't see it. Here it is. Okay, he said, oh, you mean my thumb on the right hand. I said, yeah, you're picking with the back of your nail on the thumb. I never saw anybody do that. And he said, oh, I broke my thumb on the plow, and that note just throws itself in there. I'm not supposed to do that. I can't curl my thumb like it. I said, well, it worked it in the rhythm of the song. And 35 years later, John Hartford asked me about that. He said, where does that little note that I showed him? And he used it on his next album. And God bless you, John, you didn't give me credit on the back of that album. But anyway, lots of people ask me about stuff. And you know, over the years, nobody charged me for lessons, not Mom. Well, Mom gave me a fiddle lesson, and I wasn't up for fiddler. Author, they were just so, in fact, I still owe them for all those wheels. Everybody's wonderful. So, you know, everybody, so we'll leave bowling cameras down and go to something else. If I was a sugar tree standing in the middle of the town, every time I sing the pass, I'd shake some sugar down. Oh, all them cameras down, down, baby, hooking round, round. The only song that I can sing is going to get me down.
Dances, and they played at all sorts of community celebrations, and for many years on radio stations, WAVU and Albertville. Plus, they made hundreds of musical instruments, and I hope you've had a chance to look at the displays of these fiddles. They weren't like crude country fiddles. They were beautiful violins, and we're so happy to have the opportunity to gather all these, not all of them, they named over 200. I think we have about 30 of them here, plus a mandolin. The mandolin that's in this picture right here, it's probably taken in the 1918, something like that. And we have two guitars and a mandolin. So it's just been, and let's give a good hand to Carla was William Johnson and his wife Margaret Ann and 5 children. And as they came, they were about to climb up on that sand mountain. They were fording Wills Creek, and a fiddle that they had, they brought a fiddle to Alabama, and it got wet and came apart. And that fiddle is right there now. In 1925, Avis Johnson reassembled it, and from that he learned how to make fiddles, and made the fiddles. He and Ras Johnson made the fiddles. But anyway, don't neglect the opportunity to go over there and look at that fiddle. It's, it's pre-1854 fiddle. So anyway, they decided to stay here. Well, they climbed the mountain and they were just going to spend the night, but they looked around and it was so beautiful. They decided to stay here, and they went and entered land, a large section of land in what became the community of Hustleville. And they were there, of course, during the Civil War. And they had all kinds of stories that maybe we were enough to, I don't know, but about the Civil War and the hardships that they suffered during that time. But after the Civil War, 2 of their sons, George, who was born in 1852, and William, who was born in 1857, got another fiddle. This one wasn't together yet. They got another fiddle, and between both of them played fiddle, but what they would do, in the old days, people didn't play guitars and mandolins and things. Fiddlers playing, and it makes a real nice sound. It makes bum, 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 just like a drum would. And so one of them would play the fiddle, another one would beat straws, and then he'd hand the fiddle over another one and do the same thing. And so they entertained at corn shuckings and the kind of entertainments that people had in the pioneer days on Sand Mountain. But they continued to play their whole lives until they were old men. And they inspired the next generation. And the next generation was these guys, the Johnsons, Johnson Family Band. And they were all the sons of George, who was born in 1852. They were the sons of George and his wife Elizabeth. And they raised 9 children. And I'm just going to talk about the 6 that made up the band. I didn't find out a lot about the women who weren't members. I'm sure they had all these great talents that the rest of them had. But the first son was William Henry, but he was called, does anybody know? H. He was H. That's all they ever called him, H. And he was born in 1878, and he became a fiddler. And, he had that previous generation of fiddlers to learn tunes from, and then all the fiddlers that were around here. And he amassed an amazing repertoire. He knew hundreds of fiddle tunes. And I've made recently the discovery that George, the grandson of Ras, George Ronald Johnson, has all these radio scripts that the Johnsons, when they played on the radio, they wrote out a long script of what they were going to play and who they were going to dedicate things to. So I have about 3 years, it's 40 of those scripts, and about 3 years worth. So I went through and counted the fiddle tunes that H played, and in that time there were 113 different fiddle tunes that he played. But I'm sure he knew a lot more than that. But he was like an archive of rare old tunes. Some of the tunes I wish I knew, I had ever heard. I wish somebody had recorded them. One of them was called Kick Them Hog Feet Under the Bed. One was Eating Up the Mutton and Sopping Out the Pan. And Old Gray Goose and Old White Gander. I've never heard those. And we knew a lot of tunes that he played, but we sure didn't know that. So I felt just really declined that I wasn't around when they were on the radio. And because the listeners on Sand Mountain were really lucky to get to hear those tunes. This was in the early 50s. And rock and roll was coming in, and the stations were really changing, and there were stations, as I was growing up, that only played rock and roll. But here on Sand Mountain, we got to hear tunes like Keep nothing back inside the upper hand. And I wish I could hurt those. Well, the second son was John,